Alright, howdy all you seekers of maroon Kool-Aid. This is the place for you. Today we're talking about QB1 and how it's going to be decided. Not who, not Max, not Connor. I'm not there yet, but what stat is going to decide it. So, kind of like looking at the SEC championship game, not saying we're going to win that game, but using it as a way to look back into the year on what this team needs to be. What do we need to see from these two to decide who's going to be QB1, right? So there's all sorts of different stats. You might like advanced metrics like predicted points added or player efficiency. What comes up as most important to you? Maybe you want to know situational. What happens on first, second, third down? Sometimes like with running backs, it's yards after the hit or targets downfield for QBs. That's been a big point in the last few years. Are we going to take shots down the field? We've got receivers now, so what's accuracy going to look like? So who's the most accurate? Maybe you want to know how they do home. It's a big deal for us. We want to protect home field. So home record might be something you're interested in. Maybe how they performed against top 25. Lots of different things to look at. Yeah, I'm going to try and pull this one from a place that's not typical. What is important to me, I think, is the way I want to shape this conversation. But to do that, still, let's look at past QBs. What are the QBs that come to mind for you that have been the most successful, at least in recent Aggie history, and maybe even years past? A lot of folks have been on Twitter giving me some insight, like in games to go back and check, like 87 versus Texas. I recently watched that, and it was something I wouldn't have watched at the time. I was 3 years old, but just having these old Ags come in here and say, hey, this is something that was going on back, because there's not great data and good footage to go back and watch those games. So think about it. Think about who you'd want the QB this year to mirror or come close to or embody some of that stuff, okay? So while you do that, go ahead and sub the channel. This is 3 days in a row, y'all. So I'm coming at you all a month as best I can. A lot more episodes on the way. And look, I've worked out a deal with ESPN on this one as well. So whenever we get to 1,000 subs, whenever the channel hits 1,000 subs, I've got it in the works. They're going to guarantee the first game of the 2023 year is going to be a night game. All right, you're welcome. That'll avoid all the heat, okay? So it's very important. You got to do it now. All right, now QBs that come to mind for me. Mond has got to be one of them. He's the all-time leading passer by yards. Another one, obviously, the Heisman Trophy winner, Johnny Football. Gerard Johnson comes to mind. Reggie McNeil, Tannehill. Who else? Who else? Put them in the comments if you've got some more. Let me go through some of the stats for you on these guys. So let's start with Mon. Now, Mon started off with us in 2017, played 4 years. His stats improved year after year, as you would expect, 2020 being the best. So here's what he did in 2020. 63% completion. He threw for 2,200 yards. That was good enough for a 7.7 average. 19 TDs, 3 INTs. He went down 7 times for sacks, and he had a rating of 146. Now, these ratings I'll throw in there, they're a mix mash of all sorts of different stuff. So I'm not going to dissect that, but it's something at least for you to kind of go off of and have like a landmark, okay? Johnny Football, his 2012 year, and 2013 would be interesting to look at too, and I did get a few stats from that for you too, but Heisman Trophy winning year, 68% completion, 3,700 yards. Of course, he ran for 1,400-ish yards as well. 8.5 yard average. 26 TDs to 9 interceptions, and he was sacked 22 times. I didn't realize that when I went back and looked. 22 times this guy was sacked, but he did a lot of running, a lot of attempts there, so the inflated numbers probably make sense. His rating was 155. Now, I went ahead and looked at Tannehill, and the reason why I did this is because couple of his stats jumped out at me a little bit more than Gerard Johnson's did. So 2000, I'm going to get my years mixed up a little bit, but I believe 2010 maybe it's 2009, I can't remember. Gerard went down, played six games, had about a 58% completion rate and threw for about 2,000 yards. Maybe it was 1,700, 1,900 yards. Tannehill threw for 1,600 that same year. I believe it was 2009. Tannehill threw for, well, he was good for 65% of the time. So Gerard was about 58%, and that's one of the reasons why I decided to go ahead and give you his stats. He averaged 13 TDs and 6 INTs in a half year's worth of work. About 136 rating, and he was sacked 12 times. A little bit more of a mobile, QB. Reggie McNeil, going back to his years right around the 2004 and 5 year, right around the upper 50s. And we really haven't seen anything in the 60s. You'd be surprised, though, actually, to look at 2014 when you've got Kenny Hill and Kyle Allen both getting into the upper 60s for completion percentage. And that was one that kept sticking out. So maybe completion percentage is the way to go. Completion percentage seems to be quite a big deal. I mean, if you look at anybody else, Trevor Knight, I think one year, was it 2016, 2017 early on? We had Starkle in there, maybe it was 2015. I'm getting my years mixed up a little bit. Breached into the 60s just a bit. Stephen McGee never was quite there. You know, this guy wasn't a throwing QB. He was just made of nails, tough as nails kind of guy. So passing completion percentage seems to be a pretty big deal. Let me give you what the guys recently have done. So Max and Connor, here's where they stand currently. Same categories. Connor, and just to recap their seasons real quick, because Connor only had, like 3-4 games worth of work. He came in versus Ole Miss. King came back in, I think, for Florida and South Carolina. We lose both of them with King. And then Connor comes back in for the last 3 games. So we're looking at the LSU game, of course, UMass, and I think Auburn. But he loses against Auburn, wins the next 2. Max comes in after the App State game, plays against Miami. I think Mississippi State gets at least 1 or 2 more games worth of work, so I only get about 3 or 4 games each. Connor goes 73 of 132, and he does about 900 yards. 55% completion, 6.8 yards per attempt, 8 TDs, and 8 sacks. He's averaging about 179 yards per game in each one of these, and 132 is his rating. So Max, maybe a game less worth of work or so, too, something like that. He does 43 of 71, 517 yards. He does rack up a 60% completion percentage. Now, the game we lost, frustratingly, to Mississippi State, he ended up getting it up there like 73%. So that's interesting, considering what we see in the patterns of all the other quarterbacks that have been, relatively successful. 7.3 average for Max, 3 TDs, 10 sacks. Neither of them had any INTs, I think. Somebody check me on that. Max does about 129 yards per game, and I don't know. He had about 29 rushing attempts, so he added a few more yards here. Not much to go off of, though, for Max. And so I'm left thinking again, what is the stat that makes the most sense here? And if we're going off of the pure stats, sure, passing completion percentage makes the most sense, but I'm not there with that. That's just not where I'm at with this. I think it's going to boil down to kind of 3 or 4 different things. And I'll go with one of them. But let me kind of give you some examples of where I'm at on this. And these are just not things that you can actually tally down, which is fine. And I think they're gonna bear out in some stats, though. So we'll talk about that as too. But I think we need to look at reads, checks, scrambling, processing, and just overall competency, and then the decisions you make in the face of pressure. And my last one is time spent in the film room. Okay, there's just, you can't go look these up on ESPN. You can't find them on college football stats. They're not out there, right? These are not tangible things that you can get your hands on, but I think they will bear out. So the stat I'm actually going to give you, and you'll probably go on this with two, but I think one kind of falls umbrellas under the other one. I'm going to go with turnovers or negative plays. They're kind of one and the same. I mean, turnover is the ultimate negative play, right? But I'm actually going to go with sacks. Think about it. Reads. When you get up to the line of scrimmage, you're looking at the defense, you're reading them, you're getting ready to have motion, right? We know that's coming this year. Motion's coming big time this year. So what do you know before all the motion starts? Then what do you know? What do you read after the motion takes place? All the misdirection that takes place, you're going to have quick movements by the defense as well, and you are going to need to process. How quickly are you processing? And then what kind of checks are you going into? Something that's not going to be there as well is going to be, all right, the rest of the team, are we making a solid audible? Are we making a hardcore check? Back in 2012, Johnny always looked to the sideline over to Cliff, and they'd kind of give him the read, like what we were getting ready to do, where we were supposed to go to, so that the team would kind of know that. But maybe in this more of an up-tempo kind of situation that we might be getting ourselves into, the team itself is going to have to make those reads and checks as well, and that's going to be largely on the QB to make sure that they're ready for that, on the same page, right? So a lot going on there for these kinds of things. So all that motion takes place, all these things happen. He checks. Max, Connor, they make a check, or they don't make a check. What's going to happen as a result? He's going to have to scramble if the offensive line's not on the right page, or he's going to have to make a quick throw. We have struggled mightily with hot routes recently. We have got to have these down. Which QB is going to have these hot routes down? What do they check into? Which receivers on the same page as them, so that they can get this out and avoid a sack, right? I hope this is ringing true. I think this is really a huge deal, to be quite honest. But I think it's one that Petrino is going to be on top of. So he's going to have to make that read. He's going to have to get that out, hopefully get a completion, go to the best place possible to avoid the sack. Scrambling is going to be a big deal too, because that's a lot of what Johnny got away with when pressure came. Offensive line breaks down. He creates, he makes something, he gets out of the sack and makes a throw downfield. How many times did this happen? Over and over again. So scrambling is going to be a big one. We're not going to know how this is going to play out. But again, if you can't scramble well, if you cannot read well, if you don't get us into the right checks, you're going to get sacked. And so which QB is getting sacked the most? And we won't see this until the season gets here, right? Because we're not going to be in practice either. But I think that's going to be the one that's going to have to decide this for the coaches. Whoever's getting sacked the most is not picking up the offense. They're not in the film room. They're not making the right reads and checks. They don't know where to go with the ball. So we're going to get sacked. Sure, INTs will come, but INTs don't come as often as sacks will. So sacks for me has to be the bigger indicator. Make sense? So yeah, sacks. Look for the sacks. We need to be avoiding sacks at all costs. Johnny had a bunch, but he had a lot of attempts too. And you can definitely say that the 1,400 yards that we were getting from him outweighed that. Now, if we're getting something like 2 yards per carry, which is actually what Max is currently, and Connor, they're both in about the same range. It's not, I mean, you're not going to have big numbers here right now. We didn't run a whole lot last year. We weren't going to risk hurting a QB. I'm expecting a lot more scrambling ability coming this next year, because we're wanting to go with somebody, and we should have a reasonable backup and not play as if we don't have anyone behind us, right? Yeah, Boast is back there, but that's not quite the same thing. So we are going to be scrambling a lot more. Scrambling is going to be a big deal. It could be more, but if it's only 2 yards per carry, then you know, all those extra sacks don't make sense. If you're getting us 500 or 600 yards this season with your legs, I can take a few more sacks. All right, that's going to happen. But when we're looking to pass, when we're running an RPO, are we making the right read? Are we getting the ball off to the running back? Are we holding it? Where are we going with this? And that's going to be a big part of the game as well. A lot of motion going on, and a lot of quick processing decisions will have to be made. And that's it. So good stuff, y'all. Remember, sub the channel. Sub it, sub it, sub it. I've got more stuff coming tomorrow. We are talking about QB1 specifically. We're going to talk about both of them the next 2 days. You want to be here for that, or you want to miss out? I can get you the Kool-Aid, but you got to sub. And just think, you want to beat the Heat, don't you? We all do. We all do. I do not look forward to a 105-degree game at Kyle Field with that sun coming off those bleachers. You know what I'm talking about, in September. So let's get that night game. Go ahead and hit the channel. Until then, thanks and gig 'em.